plebes unum presentas elecciones presidenciales en la historia mexicana. The 20th official presidential election in Mexican history took place on July 1st, 2018. Remember the last election when people were divided over if Peña Nieto was a glimmer of hope for Mexico or same old PRI? Yeah, guess who ended up being right during all that? Nieto's administration was mixed at best. I'll start off with the positives. Under his administration, more than 2 million jobs were created, more than half of which were actually well-paying. He also created special economic zones in the southern/poorer parts of the country to expand industries. That's pretty much all I can say about the positives of Nieto. He continued the Mexican drug war, censored and spied out journalists that spoke out against him, such as Carmen Aristegui, who exposed the house that Nieto owned was actually registered in the name of a company he had contracted to build a bullet train. The biggest policy he enacted during his administration was the partial privatization of Mexico's oil industry, which had nothing to do with the fact that the head of a Brazilian oil company was funding Nieto's campaign before being appointed as the head of Pemex. The privatization led to gas prices going up and massive protests against Nieto. And remember the media bias from the last election? Well, it was still prevalent as Time magazine published an article entitled Saving Mexico, where they claimed that Nieto was ending the drug war and the privatization of oil was loved by the Mexican populace. Yeah, most of the time people don't protest things they like. But the biggest event that happened during his administration was when on September 26, 2014, 43 students who were traveling via bus to commemorate the Tlatelolco massacre disappeared, and it was later discovered that Mexican police had kidnapped the students and given them up to a cartel to be massacred. It wasn't even just local cops either. Federal police and the military allegedly took part in this as well. Yeah, unsurprisingly, Nieto's approval rating dropped as low as 12% by the end of his term, and Mexican people were saying this:
¡Chinga tu madre, Peña Nieto!
¡Chinga su putísima madre!
Enrique Peña Nieto, ¡chinga tu madre!
¡Chinga tu madre, Peña! Ahí está!
Nieto's approval going down meant that the approval of opposition parties went up. But the same old opposition parties weren't necessarily cutting it for Mexico, so 2 more parties were actually born to oppose Nieto. First, we'll talk about the Social Encounter Party, a Christian conservative right-wing populist political party. But the more prevalent one was the one that I teased in the last video, the one that AMLO founded. The party was called Movimiento Regeneración Nacional, or the National Regeneration Movement, or Morena, because AMLO really liked nicknames. Morena sought to translate the Yo Soy 132 movement into political action and hearken to the ideology of the Cardenases. Morena was the more popular of the two, winning more seats than 3 long-existing political parties in Mexico. With all that out of the way, let's move on to the presidential election itself. 9 parties were eligible to participate in this election, but in 1994, this is not. So only 3 of them actually ended up running Canada. First, we'll start off with the PRI. They had the presidency, but their grip on power was hanging by a thread, so they needed a candidate with broad enough appeal to keep the power. First, they reformed their electoral process to give non-party members the ability to seek their party's nomination. A lot of people tried to push themselves as their candidate. However, the party officially decided to wipe off the old Dedazo strategy and nominated cabinet member to Calderon and Nieto, Jose Antonio Meade, to be their candidate. Second was the PAN, which had a similar situation. A lot of people tried to seek the party's nomination, but the party was really only interested in 2 people's prospects: former First Lady to Felipe Calderon, Margarita Zavala, and former party president Ricardo Anaya. As much as Zavala tried, it seemed that they didn't want her association with Calderon to hinder them, and they pretty much decided to nominate Anaya. Zavala and her supporters criticized this as pretty much being the Didazo in disguise, and not that long after, Zavala decided to resign from the PAN. And lastly, was the leftist party of Morena. Yeah, newly formed Morena decided to step up to the plate and offer up a candidate for the election, as opposed to the already existing left-wing parties. The reason the PRD didn't step up to the plate was that right before the midterms, Cuauhtemoc Cárdenas decided to leave the PRD, and they were going through a bit of an identity crisis without their moral leader, an identity crisis they are still going through to this day. But back to Morena, there was absolutely zero hesitation in nominating AMLO as their candidate despite his past failures. Now, where does that leave the remaining political parties? Well, they could have ran their own candidates, and many of them thought about running their own candidates, but they all felt that it was probably in their best interests to form alliances with one of the three major candidates in order to have a good chance to have their platform being heard. First, we'll start off with the Labour Party, which was also pretty unanimous in deciding that AMLO would be their nominee. In fact, this made many people think that the PRD and the Citizens Movement would join up with Morena and the Labour Party to form a broad leftist coalition. However, AMLO himself personally stated that this was not going to happen due to the differences that these parties had that caused AMLO to leave and form his own run to begin with. Especially considering during the midterms, these two parties actually ran candidates against Morena, whereas the Labour Party, being concerned with leftism being the broad idea of Mexico, chose to stand down and align itself with Morena during the midterms. So where does that leave these two? Well, they were born out of PRI dissidents, so that was off the table 100%. So they decided to join in a coalition with Ricardo Anaya called the Front for Mexico in order to combat the PRI, but also stand a chance against AMLO. They ran under the motto, "Facing the Future, President Anaya." Next was the ecologist Green Party of Mexico. Now you see, they originally wanted to join the Front for Mexico, but party differences had decided that was not going to happen. They briefly considered running their own candidates, even at one point floating the idea of stealing the PRD's moral leader Cárdenas, but they inevitably decided, and we'll just join a coalition with the PRI. The New Alliance Party had similar intentions. They considered having Quadri run as their candidate again, but they felt that maybe joining the Front for Mexico was a better use for their time. However, negotiations fell through again, so they decided to hold their noses and join a coalition with the PRI and PFEM. The coalition was aptly titled Citizen Made for Mexico. But the Electoral Commission said, whoa, hold on a second, bro. You can't have your candidate's name and your alliance name. You'd be turning all the down ballot races to campaign memorabilia for you, so you gotta change that. So they renamed their coalition to Everyone for Mexico and ran under the motto, "Move forward with you." And lastly came the Social Encounter Party. They didn't exactly know what to do. First, there were talks of them running Zavala as their candidate, but plans fell through. Now you might say, how about the Front for Mexico? Mexico had already been controlled by the PAN for 12 years, and things didn't get better, so they were hesitant on doing that. And the party leader, Hugo Flores, already blatantly stated, "We do not negotiate with the PRI." And soon after also stated, "We have two options, go alone or go with Morena." And soon afterwards, they decided to join up with Morena's coalition, and they called it Together We Will Make History, running under the motto, Together We Will Make History. This decision was criticized by the media, as PES was very different ideologically from the remaining members of the coalition, but AMLO responded by saying, "The party believes in inclusion," and Hugo Flores responded by saying, "The only possibility of real change in a country is one headed by Andrés Manuel López Obrador." So it comes off more ideologically pure than the previous coalitions. Was that it? No, because this was the first election in a long time where independent presidential candidates could participate in, and as such, many independents decided to join in the fray. First was former Senator from Guerrero, Armando Rios Petir, who had left the PRD to start an independent political movement called the Jaguar Movement. Second was Maria de Jesus Patricio Martinez, who would run as the candidate of the National Indigenous Congress and the Zapatistas. Third was former governor of Nuevo León, Jaime El Bronco Calderón, who had been notable for calling out the media's unfair coverage of his gubernatorial run. He ran under the motto, "Not allowed to give up." And lastly was Margarita Zavala, running a campaign that would call out the party she had previously been aligned with, running under the motto, "Courage is Margarita." However, of these four, Zavala was the only one to turn in enough signatures to appear on the ballot. Petir thought that this was good, and he proposed him and Calderon unite behind Zavala to have a unified independent front to rehabilitate all of the major parties in Mexico. But Calderon decided to appeal to the Elections Commission, and he was allowed to appear on the ballot. No such luck for the other two. Now, this election was a huge boiling point, as it came after 78 uninterrupted years of neoliberalism and neoconservatism. Mexico was sick and tired of the same old, and they wanted change. All of the candidates tried to position themselves as the candidate of change in a variety of ways. Anaya promised to implement a universal basic income. AMLO and Zavala proposed ending all benefits presidents got after their term ends, though AMLO specified that he would then use that money to help senior citizens. Made promised to create a government agency called the Unique Registry of the Necessities of Each Person to keep track of the individual needs of every Mexican citizen, an idea that was mocked relentlessly. Plus, Made was openly trying to continue Nieto's privatization of the oil industry, which AMLO criticized, and El Bronco proposed bringing back the death penalty for high crimes such as murder and drug trafficking, and cutting off the hands of government officials accused of corruption. But the one thing that seemed to be on everybody's mind was what would happen to Nieto. As he was accused of corruption too, what's going to happen to him? Anaya stated that he would be open to an investigation towards Nieto, but AMLO stated that he would also extend that honor towards every past president still alive. You see, the common thing that was established during this election cycle was that whatever one of the other candidates offered, AMLO usually provided a better version of it. One candidate wants to keep privatizing the oil industry, AMLO wants to renationalize it. One candidate wants to punish the most recent president for his corruption, AMLO wants to try and extend that to all the past presidents. One candidate wants to just stop having the president receiving many of these big kinds of benefits, AMLO wants to do that too, but also wants to use that money to help senior citizens, and doesn't have the baggage of having previously gotten those benefits as the First Lady. One candidate wants to stop corruption by cutting off corrupt officials' hands off. AMLO will try to stop corruption in a more peaceful manner. You see, the basic takeaway was that Mexico was sick and tired of the same old PRI, the PAN with a slightly different flavor, and people who were supposedly dissidents who left these two parties weren't exactly giving them what they wanted either. So then that leaves AMLO as the final person that they have as a person to offer ideas, and the ideas he offered, they were really supportive of it. And AMLO quickly shot to the top of the polls, having pretty much double-digit leads throughout the entire election. The closest anyone ever got in the polls was Anaya being below AMLO by 8 points. Things were looking good for AMLO, even more so when Zavala suspended her campaign, leaving just the three amigos opposing AMLO. However, there was a bit of trouble on the horizon for him, coming from the good old US of A. First, U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security at the time, John Kelly, stated that a leftist president, quote, would not be good for America or Mexico. And U.S. National Secretary Advisor at the time, H.R. McMaster, claimed that Russia was going to influence the Mexican presidential election. Now, he didn't say who Russia was going to influence in the Mexican presidential election, but the implication was there. Even more so when PRI President Enrique Ochoa Arenza, openly stated that AMLO was being supported by, quote, Russian and Venezuelan interests. U.S. Senators Bob Menendez and Marco Rubio also called Rex Tillerson to investigate Russian meddling in Mexican elections. Bit interesting coming from little Marco. AMLO, of course, denied all these allegations, even mocking them by referring to himself as Andres Manuelovich, and paid really no mind to this and focused more on actually campaigning for the presidency. The more legitimate concerns of election tampering came from the PRI. As it turns out, they were up to their old shenanigans from previous years, accusations that they'd vote by or crash the system again, and apparently Made having his own army of bots. In fact, it was reported that 94% of his Twitter followers were bots. Plus, Made spent more money during the campaign than AMLO and Anaya combined, and yet, when asked, he would never tell anybody where he got the money from. In comparison, AMLO was apparently the best in reporting his finances. And here are the results. Unsurprisingly, but not for the reason that we're used to, AMLO won, getting 53.19% of the popular vote. Anaya got 22.28% of the popular vote. Made got 16.41% of the popular vote. El Bronco got 5.23% of the vote. And despite her dropping out, 0.06% of people still voted for Zalava. In the Chamber of Duties, AMLO's coalition easily won a majority in a huge electoral landslide. Though there were some party shifts that did happen not that long after Election Day, and even more so, changing now. For starters, the New Alliance Party and the Social Encounter Party received the least amount of votes among the remaining parties and lost their registries, dissolving and merging into the coalitions that they were already a part of. Second, the PRD, still going through their identity crisis, announced that they would leave the PAN's coalition and try to figure things out on their own. Third, PVEM announced that they would leave the PRI's coalition and join up with Morena and the Labour Party to form a new coalition. And lastly, Felipe Calderon and his wife Zalava announced that they were going to be forming their own political party called Mexico Libre that would be contesting in the 2021 midterms. Speaking of the 2021 midterms, AMLO himself had actually stated that due to his populist leanings, he would be open to the idea of holding a mid-election vote on his presidency so that the people, if they didn't like him, could choose to kick him out of the presidency early. So maybe I might be seeing you a little sooner than I thought. Oh yeah, and these smears that he faced during this election and his life up to this point, yeah, they haven't gone away either. So, either next year or in 2023, te veré para las próximas elecciones, amigo. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website or follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Quora, join me on Discord, or check out my articles on the Independent Political Report.